Welcome back to the Simulator Series. In today's episode, we are going to be creating the long-awaited Game Pass system. Now, as usual, if you do enjoy it, make sure you smash the like button, also the subscribe button, and check out the Patreon if you want to support me and get access to all the scripts and the game file that we make in this episode. And with that being said, let's hop right into it. So, hopping directly into Studio, the first thing that we're going to do is create the GUI. Let's go inside of the Starter GUI, and we're going to go to our Shop Screen GUI and make sure that we have that enabled. Now that we have it enabled, let's go actually inside of it. So, inside of the frame, and inside of here, we have a couple of different frames and a button. What we're actually going to do is duplicate the clicks frame, and we're going to rename this to be called Gamepasses. Now what we'll then do is select all the other frames except for buttons, and then we're going to set these to no longer be visible. And now we only have the Gamepasses frame visible. Now the first thing I'm going to do is update the background color of this. I want it to be a little bit of a darker color, so we're going to go with that. Then we can actually go inside of this frame. Inside of here we have the title and the subtitle. Let's go ahead and update the text of the title to say Game Pass Store. And then for the subtitle, we'll update the text of that to say keep all purchases forever. Now, next what we have to do is actually update our container. Instead of having just a simple frame as our container, we actually want to add in a scrolling frame. Now that we've added that in, let's go ahead and rename this to be called container. Next, what we're going to want to do is basically just copy the size and position properties from our frame container to our brand new scrolling container. So let's go ahead and copy the size, and then we'll also copy the anchor point as well as the position. So there we go. Now that we've done that, what we can then do is drag all the children from our previous container into the brand new one. So there we go. And now we've done that, we can actually delete the frame container. Then what we're going to do is actually resize this container once again. Now how we want to resize this is we actually want to drag the left side a little bit towards the right. So I'm going to do that here. And now for the specific sizing of it, I think there's enough room if you have the X scale of the sizing set to 0.786. And now the reason that we actually have to resize this is because we're going to put another frame on the left side of this container. Now it's not only going to be on the left side of the container, the new frame that we're going to add here is almost going to stretch the entire height of this. So we also want to move the subtitle and the title itself as well. So we can go ahead and reposition the subtitle and the title. And now those are looking pretty good. Next, what we're going to do is throw a frame inside of the Game Passes frame, and we're going to rename this to be called Info. Now let's go ahead and start off by resizing this to scale. So we'll just say 0.2.2. And now that we've resized it to scale, we can actually manually resize it by using our mouse. Now for the height and width of this frame, we pretty much just wanted to fit somewhere over on the left side of everything that we just moved. So that sizing might be decent. You might want to make it a little bit larger, but you might run into an issue here where you try to expand it horizontally, but then it keeps snapping over to all of these objects right here. What I would do instead is just manually adjust the position number. So we can set that to like 0.17. That didn't really make any of a difference. So maybe 0.18. There we go. That definitely made a difference right there. Although you still might want to make it a little bit smaller, or you might want to make it a little bit larger. I think I'm going to leave it at that. The next thing we want to do is we want to center this vertically. So let's go to the anchor point, set that to 0.5. And then for the position on the Y scale, we'll set that to 0.5 as well. Then what we can do is go ahead and update the background color of this. And now for the color, I'm going to go with kind of like a ugly blue, I would say. It's not my most favorite blue, but you know, it is a blue. So that's what I'm going to go with. Cool. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and add an image label inside of the info frame. And we're just going to rename this to be called image. For the size of this, we of course want to make this scale. I'm going to go with 0.85 on the X and 0.25 on the Y. Now that we've done this, we want to make sure that we center this horizontally. So let's set that to 0.5 as well as that. And then let's also just drag this down a tiny bit as well. And I think that actually is positioned perfectly. Now, of course, the usual properties that we have to adjust is the scale type. We want to set that to fit. For the background color of this, we're going to go with 1. And now just to set a placeholder image sort of a thing, we're going to go ahead and use the clicker buttons icon. Next, what we'll do is duplicate the title text label and drag that inside of the info frame. We'll rename this to be called description. Now for the text of this, we want more of a longer text. So I set this to instantly teleport to any unlocked island. The reason that we want a longer text is because we want to see what this will look like when the text is longer than what most items might be. And then for the text X alignment, we're going to set that to center. Now that we've done that, we can resize and reposition this. So for the width, it might honestly be set to the same that we set the image label to. And now for the height, we can make this relatively tall, but we do want it to appear below the image label, and we almost want it to be aligned in the center. Now, if you do want to center align it vertically, you definitely can. I'm only going to center it horizontally, so we'll set those properties to 0.5. And then with this text label, I think I'm going to set the stroke to 1 so that there is no stroke. Then what I'm going to do is duplicate the description text label, and then we're going to rename this to be called price. Now for the text of this, we're going to say something like 999 Robux, and then we're going to resize this a little bit and move it down as well. Now, I think for the size, I'm going to make it 0.1 just to be that nice number, but you can make it smaller or larger depending on how you want to. I think that looks pretty decent. I think we might actually reposition it in a minute though. Anyways, the next thing we're going to do is throw a text button inside of here, and we're going to rename this to be called buy. Now, of course, for the text of this, it is going to be set to blank. What we can then do is duplicate the price text label, put that inside of the buy button. We don't need to rename this text label, but we can rename it the title if we want to. For the text of this, we're going to set that to buy. For the size of this, we are probably going to go with a 0.85 by 0.85. We'll see if we want to make it larger or smaller in a bit. For the position, we of course want to center this horizontally and vertically, so set all those to 0.5 that you need to. Then going to the actual button itself. For the background color, we're going to go with a nice-ish green. And for the size, at least on the the X, we're going to go with 0.9. On the Y, we'll go with 0.1 for right now. And then we can drag the button to be pretty much the bottom of the info frame. Now, that's not looking too bad. You, of course, might want to resize this a little bit. Maybe you want to make it a little bit smaller. Maybe you want to make it a little bit taller. But honestly, I don't think it looks too bad. But what I'm going to do is drag the price text label down a little bit so that it appears just above the button. And then I guess I will make sure that this is centered horizontally. So let's set that to 0.5 and that to 0.5. Okay, cool. So we're pretty much done with the info frame. The last few things that I want to do is throw a UI corner inside of here. So let's go ahead and set the corner radius to 0.1, see how that looks. I think 0.1 might look fine, but maybe we'll go with 0.05 to give it a little bit less rounded corners. We'll throw another one inside of the buy button. For this, I think I'll go with 0.15. And then that's all that we're going to do for the info frame. So we can collapse that. And now let's get back to working on our container frame. Now, for the scroll bar, we want to make sure that we set the vertical scroll bar inset to always. I also want to decrease the scroll bar thickness, so I think I'm going to go with about an 8. Let's then update the canvas size, and I'm going to set the Y scale to 1. And then we also want to make sure that we set the automatic canvas size to Y. And most likely the last change that we're going to make to the scrolling frame is setting the background transparency to 1. Now that we've done that, let's go inside of the container. We can go to our template, and then let's set the visibility of this to true so that we can actually see it. Now, for the UI grid layout, the only adjustment that I'm going to make to this is setting the vertical alignment to top and the horizontal alignment to left. So now our first template appears at the top left of our container. Now, when it comes to the template, what we're going to do is first start off by deleting the bottom frame. Then for the icon, we can actually go ahead and center this perfectly. So let's go ahead and update the position on the Y-axis. Next, for the price label, we're actually going to rename this to be called title. For the text of this, we can set it to something like plus 500 pets. For the text color, we are going to go with a white. You can adjust the text stroke transparency depending on how you like that. For the text X alignment, though, we are going to set that to center. And then we're going to increase the sizing of this a little bit. So on the X scale, we are going to set that to 0.85. And on the Y scale, we are going to set this to 0.175. Now we've done that, let's go ahead and center this horizontally. So 0.5 and 0.5. And then we also might want to drag this down just a tiny bit on the Y. So 0.039 looks pretty decent to me. Now, of course, I'd recommend to make your own adjustments to this. If you don't want the text to overlap the icon, then you can move the icon down a little bit, or you can readjust the title text label sizing. It really all depends on how you want to go about it. But with that being said, I think this looks pretty good, so I'm going to leave all of that how it is. But what I'm then going to do is duplicate this a couple of times just to see how it actually populates the GUI and looks. So now if we scroll down, we can see that it all looks pretty good in my opinion. So I think I'm good with that. What I'm then going to do is delete all the extra templates, just leaving one. Oh, now I actually almost forgot something. Luckily, I went into mobile device view and saw what it looked like. The last thing that we have to do is readjust the subtitle text label. So we have to resize this a little bit because clearly it is too large. So what I'm going to do is just simply drag this to the left a little bit. And now that sizing looks pretty good to me. Let's look at the mobile view, and that all looks like it's fitting pretty well. Perfect. So now with that being said, we can now start with the scripting side of things. Now, before we begin actually scripting this whole system out, we are going to want to add the game passes to our game. Roblox doesn't actually give us a way to do this from Roblox Studio. So remember how in the last couple of episodes, we went to the website and we added developer products? Well, we're going to do it the exact same way. But of course, rather than going to the developer products section where we already added our developer products, we are going to go to the passes section and click on the create a pass button. Inside of here, we can go ahead and upload an image, set the name, and also set the description as well. Now, this process is not a fast one, and we're going to be creating about 25 of these. So on screen right now, I'm going to create a list of all the different game passes that we're going to add to our game, and then you guys can feel free to add that yourself. So for our first game pass, I'm going to set the name of this to VIP, and for the description, we're going to go with get a chat tag and color and plus 25% luck, and it also stacks. Then I'm going to go ahead and click on create pass, and now we can see that our pass has been created. The next thing that we're going to want to do is click on our game pass. Then on the left side of our screen, we have the sales tab. We're going to click on that, and now we're going to set this item to sale, and then we actually want to set the price of it. So for the price of this, I'm going to set that to $999, and then I'm going to click on save changes. Now that we've done that, we can go back to the passes screen, and we can see that our pass has been created. Now we're going to add about 24 more passes to this. So to do this, we are going to have to repeat that process 24 different times. Yeah, Roblox does not give you an easy or a really efficient way of adding game passes. It sucks and it's slow, but that's what we got to do. Okay, so these are all the game passes that I have created. I still have to set them all to sale, and I did actually set the image for one of them, which is the plus 100 pet storage, but that image is still being verified by Roblox, so it might not appear here for a little while. You might be wondering if there are any game passes that I can provide to you guys. Before I created this series, I didn't actually have a game pass pack created for us, but I think hopefully at the end of the month, I might be releasing a game pass pack on my Patreon. So I'd recommend just temporarily using placeholder images or something else so that you can at least see what the images look like. Now, with that being said, I'm going to go back through all these and set these to be on sale, and then I'll be right back with you. Cool. So in the amount of time it took me to set all these on sale, Roblox did actually approve our image, so that's looking great. Now in the future, we may definitely add more game passes to this, or the ones that you're seeing right now, we might not implement all of them exactly. We'll see when that comes in the future, but these are the ones that I just added right now, and like I said, we still may add more in the future, but just not during this episode. Anyways, one of the last things that we need to do on this page is actually copy the ID of every single one of these game passes. So in order to copy the ID, we're going to click these three white dots at the top right of the actual image and then click on copy asset ID. Now you might not need to do that now exactly, but what I'd recommend doing is copying all these IDs and saving them in kind of a list like we did in the previous episodes for the developer products. Oh, it actually looks like I made a duplicate Game Pass, so if you guys saw me do that, I'm just going to go ahead and take one of them off sale because it doesn't seem like you can delete the Game Pass, I don't think, so I'm just going to leave one of them on sale while taking the other one off sale. Okay, I've now copied and made a list of all the pass IDs, so now we can pretty much exit off of this webpage. Cool, so to begin scripting this, the first thing that we're going to do is add all of those IDs to our shop's config. So we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the configs folder, and open up the shop's module script. Now, of course, inside of here, we have our products table, which originally when I was making this system, I think I was planning on having different tables for products and game passes. But what I realized is that we actually don't have to have different tables for these. We can just list them all in the same exact table without having any issues. So what I'm going to do is add a brand new key to this table called Gamepasses, which is going to be set to a table. This table is going to be the exact same as how we have all of our other tables, so it's going to be an array. And actually, the only property that we're going to have inside of all these tables for right now is just going to be called ID. And then what is that ID property going to be set to? Well, it's going to be set to a number, which is going to be the actual ID of your Game Pass. Now you might be thinking, if that's the only property that you're going to be adding to these tables, why are we actually even creating tables for these at all? Well, you guys have seen me countless times in the past converting some of our arrays to dictionaries because it turns out that we actually do need to store an additional property in here that we didn't think of a little while ago. So that's why I always like to play it safe by creating a dictionary, because then we can always add more properties to this in the future if we need to. Anyways, with that being said, what I'm going to do is go ahead and create a dictionary with the ID property for every single one of our Game Passes. Okay, cool. I just got finished adding all those Game Passes, and now we can finally move on. The next thing that we're actually going to do inside of here is create a brand new function. This function is going to be called Does Player Own Game Pass? Now this function is going to have a parameter called ID, which is going to be a number, as well as data, which is going to be the player's profile data. And this function is relatively simple. All we're going to do is return the data.gamepasses, and then we're going to index that with the specific Game Pass ID. Now you might be confused because we haven't actually added the Game Passes table to our player's data yet, but we're actually about to do that right now. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the client folder, and we're going to open up the state module script. So in order to do that, we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the player data, and open up the template module script. Now that we've done that, towards the top of our screen, we want to create a variable for the shop's config. So we're going to say config.shop, and then we'll say shop config. Then we'll create a variable called default game passes, which is going to be equal to a blank table. After that, we want to loop through all the game passes that we just added to that config table. So we're going to say for Game Pass info in shop config.products.gamepasses do. Then we're going to index the default Game Passes table with the Game Pass info.id, and we're going to set that equal to false because of course all of the players by default will not own a single Game Pass. And now that we've done that, let's go down to our template variable. Below achievements, we're going to add a brand new key called Game Passes, and that's going to be equal to the default Game Passes table, just like that. Now the next thing that we can actually start doing is scripting the GUI. So we're going to go inside of the start player, inside of the start player scripts, open up the GUI folder, open up the shop folder, and open up the shop local script. Inside of here, we're going to want to create some new variables. So below the pets frame, we are going to create a brand new variable for the Game Passes frame. So we're going to say Game Passes, and then we're going to say Game Passes frame. We'll then also create a variable for the Game Passes container. So inside of the Game Passes frame, we have the Game Passes container, and there we go. We now have those two variables created. Along with those two variables, we're going to want to create another variable called selected Game Pass ID, which is just going to be a number. We'll then go to our set mode function, and inside of here, we also need to add our Game Passes frame. So we're going to say Game Passes frame.visible equals mode equals passes. Now, above our update pet time function, we're going to create a brand new function, which is going to be called generate Game Passes. Inside of here, we're going to loop through all of the Game Passes inside of our shop's config. So for Game Pass info in shop config.products.gamepasses do. Now, how this function is going to work is going to be quite similar to the generate click packages function. So what I'm going to actually do is copy a couple of the variables directly from here because we're going to use them inside of this for loop as well. So I'm going to go ahead and paste them inside of here. Again, we're going to use the marketplace get product ID. Instead of saying the package.id, we're going to say Game Pass info.id. And then as well for the info type, we're not trying to get a product info. We're actually trying to get the Game Pass info. And you might be thinking, why are we using a method called get product info for Game Passes? Hey, that's Roblox's decision. And the difference between them is that we provide an info type for what specific type of product I guess we're looking for. I don't know. That is really confusing when you think about it. I don't know why they went with that naming scheme, but hey, it works, I guess. Now the price is going to be set up the exact same way. One thing you might want to consider is you might want to set this to or 0. The reason for that is because when I was testing this out myself, I actually forgot to set the price of a Game Pass and put it on sale on the website. And if you do that, you're going to receive an error here, but at least during testing, if you just set this to or 0, even if you didn't set the price and even if you didn't set it on sale, you won't have any issues then. But if you did set the price of every single Game Pass, then you don't have to include or 0 there. We then have the image variable, which is good. We're then going to create a name variable, which is going to be equal to productinfo.name. We'll then also create a variable called description, which is going to be equal to productinfo.description. And now with all those variables created, let's go ahead and create a variable called clone, which is of course going to be equal to the Game Pass container.template, and then we're going to want to clone that. Now that we've cloned that, let's go ahead and make sure that we parent that to the Game Passes container. We'll also set the visibility of it equal to true. We'll also rename it as well, so clone.name equals gamepassinfo.id. Then let's go ahead and update the image label. So clone.icon.image equals, and then we also want to use that same string that we use down here as well. So actually, we can literally just copy and paste that right here. Cool. So now that we set the image, let's also update the title text label as well. And we're going to set the text of the title text label to the actual name of the Game Pass. And now we've actually updated everything that we need to on the template. The next thing that we're going to do is listen for it to be clicked. So let's connect that to an anonymous function. And whenever this is clicked, we actually want to call a new function that we haven't created yet. So let's go ahead and create that function. This function is going to be called select Game Pass. It's going to accept an ID, which is going to be a number, an image, which is going to be a string, a description, which is a string, and a price, which is a number. Then when this function is called, we're going to set the selected Game Pass ID equal to the ID passed to this function. And then we're going to start updating the info frame. Now, one thing that I kind of forgot to do was create a variable for the info frame inside of the Game Passes frame. Now, theoretically, for this variable, we could set the name of this variable to be info frame, but at the same time, we could also have info frames in our other frames as well, so we might not want to name it info frame exactly. I guess instead, I will go with what feels like a very long name called Game Pass info frame, and we're simply going to set that to gamepassesframe.info. You might want to make it plural to kind of stick with the theme, so I guess we'll actually change it to Game Passes info frame. Anyways, now that we've done that, we can actually start using it. So Game Passes info frame.image, and we want to set that image of this equal to the same image that we set down here. So let's actually just go ahead and copy and paste that. There we go. We'll also want to update the description text label as well, which is going to be equal to the description. And then we'll also update the text of the price text label as well. So we'll say format number.format, and then we'll pass through the price. Cool. And that's all that we had to do for this function. So now let's actually call this function. Where are we going to call that? Well, whenever we actually click this. So we'll call select Game Pass. We'll pass through the gamepassinfo.id, the image, the description, and the price as well. Cool. So now we're pretty much done with these functions. Let's go down to the bottom of our script and actually call that generate Game Passes function. So right above where we call the set mode function, let's go ahead and call the generate Game Passes function. And now actually, I just thought about it. One more thing that we want to do inside of the generate Game Passes function is when this GUI is generated, we actually want to set one selected Game Pass so that that's displayed to the player whenever they open up this menu. Otherwise, it'll just display this kind of setup that we have right here for it, which is a little inaccurate. Now, the easiest way that we can do this is right below where we listen for this to be clicked. We're going to say if not selected Game Pass ID, then what we're going to do is just call selected Game Pass with that ID right there. So now that we've used this if statement, this function is only going to be called once, and it's going to be called with the first Game Pass that we actually generate. Now, once again, going back towards the bottom of our script, let's go ahead and actually script the buy button. So we're going to say Game Pass info frame.buy.mouse button one click, connect that to an anonymous function. Now, whenever a player tries to click the buy button, what we want to do is check if they already own the Game Pass. So remember that function that we created earlier in the shops config? We're going to create a variable called owns Game Pass, which is going to be equal to the shop config that does player own Game Pass. We'll pass through the selected Game Pass ID as well as the state manager.getData. Now, if the player does not own the Game Pass, then what are we going to do? Well, we're going to use the marketplace service. We're going to use the prompt Game Pass purchase method. We'll pass through the player, and then we'll also pass through the selected Game Pass ID as well. And now that we've done that, we should be pretty much good for scripting this on the client side. Let's go into our game and actually test this out. So going into our game and looking at this, it does look like everything is working as it should be. The images are, of course, this blank default image, but that's just because that's what Roblox sets it to by default. If we look right here, we can actually see our official Game Pass image, and that is set correctly. If we select any of these, we can see that the description is set as well as the price, but I do see we made a mistake here and we forgot to include the word Robux there, so we will go back and fix that. But let's go ahead and try to click the buy button on one of these. And when we do try to click the buy button, it says you already own this item, your account has not been charged, but that's okay because that does mean if we weren't the owner of the game, it would have tried to prompt us to purchase this. So that does mean that this would be normally working correctly. Anyways, let's go to our script real quick and fix that one issue with the Robux that we said. So right here where we set the price, instead of setting it to just that, what we are going to do is set it to that, but plus use the word Robux. Cool. And now with that being said, let's start scripting this on the server side. So in order to do that, we're going to go inside of the server script service and we're going to open up the shop script. Now we'll go to the bottom of the script and we're actually going to connect to an event. So we're going to say marketplace service.prompt Game Pass purchase finished, and we're going to connect this to a function. Now we'll go ahead and create this new function. So we'll say local function purchase Game Pass. Parameters of this function are a little bit clearer than the purchase product one. So we're going to accept a player, which of course is going to be a player. We'll also have an ID, which is going to be a number, and then we'll also have a boolean given to us, which is going to be called was purchased. So now that we've created that function, let's go ahead and connect it to this event right here. So we'll just say purchase Game Pass, and there we go. We now have that function hooked up. Let's actually start creating this function. The first thing we want to check is if was purchased purchased is not true. So if the Game Pass was not actually purchased, then we don't want to do anything. So let's just return N, stop the function right there. Next, what we want to do is create a variable for the player's profile. And of course, we're going to use the player data to do that. We'll get the profiles table, and then we'll index that table with the actual player. Now, if we're not able to find the profile, then we also don't want to do anything. So we'll stop the function right there. After that, we're going to go inside of the player's profile. We'll go inside of that Game Pass table, and then we're going to index that table with the Game Pass ID and set that equal to true. And now we've just updated the player's data. We also need to make sure that we replicate this to the player on the client side. So let's go ahead and add a brand new remote event for this. We're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside the remotes folder, and we're going to add a brand new remote event to this. And we're going to rename that remote event to be called Update Game Pass. So going back inside of our function, we're going to go inside of the remotes, and then we'll use the Update Game Pass remote event. We'll fire client, pass through the client that we want to fire to, pass through the Game Pass ID, as well as pass through true because the player has purchased it. Now that's actually all that we have to do in that function. There are some Game Passes that we might have to call another function to handle those, but for the most part, a lot of the Game Passes in our game are actually just going to be enabled because they already take into account the player's data inside of the Game Passes into them. Now we of course are going to have to go into the functions which listen to that data already and then add this specifically into it. We haven't done that yet, but we will do that in the future. The next thing we have to account for though is when a player purchases a Game Pass through the website. If the player purchases the Game Pass through the website, then the prompt Game Pass purchase finished event is not going to be fired. Instead, what we're going to want to do is create a function called check Game Pass purchased from website, which is going to accept a player and the player's data. Now, inside of this function, we're going to create a variable called profile, and we're going to actually get the player's profile. Now, you might be thinking, well, isn't that profile's data already passed to us with this function? Well, technically, yes, the data is passed to this, but that's just a reference to that data. So if we actually modify this data variable, the profile doesn't actually update. We need to get the actual player's profile so that we can update their data. Then what we're going to do is loop through all of the Game Passes. So we're going to say for Game Pass ID, comma, is owned in profile.data.gamepasses. Now, when we're looping through all of these, we only really need to check the ones that are not owned currently. So we're going to say if not is owned, then we want to check if the player has purchased it from the website. So we'll create a variable called has purchased, which is going to be equal to the marketplace service. We'll use the user owns Game Pass async method. We'll pass through the player's user ID as well as the Game Pass ID. And now if the player has purchased the Game Pass, then what we're going to do is call purchase Game Pass. We'll pass through the player, we'll pass through the Game Pass ID, and then we'll also pass through true for was purchased. And now by just calling this function, it's going to update the player's data, and it'll also replicate it to the client as well. And now that we've created that function, we now have to actually use it. When are we going to use it? Well, we're going to use it when the player's profile has been loaded. And we can easily do that because we've already created a bindable event for when the player's profile has been loaded. So we're going to say player data.profile loaded.event, and then we can connect that to the check Game Pass purchased function, just like that. Cool. So now one of the last things that we need to do is update the player's state because we did just add a brand new remote event and we did just update the player state. So we'll go inside of the replicated storage, we'll go inside of the client folder, we'll open up the state module script and go to the bottom of this. At the bottom of this, we can pretty much just copy and paste any of the remote events that we're already listening to, and we'll update this remote to be the update Game Pass remote event. Inside of here, for these parameters, we'll accept the ID as well as was purchased, which is going to be a boolean. Then what we're going to do is index the player's data. We'll go inside of their Game Passes table, then we'll index that table with the specific ID, and we will set that equal to was purchased. Awesome. And now that we've done that, one of the last things that we need to do is just update the GUI to hide the template. So we'll go inside of the start GUI, inside of the shop GUI, inside of the Game Passes, inside of the container, and then for the template, we're going to set the visibility of this to false. We can also set the enable property of the shop GUI to false as well. Go into our game and test this out. So hopping directly into our game, let's go ahead and open up the shop. We'll click on passes, and now we can see all of our passes once again. Oh my gosh, one thing I just realized, ignore that $sign that I put right there. The reason I accidentally included the $sign here was because most of the time I script, I actually use TypeScript, and their method of creating a string is very, very similar to Louis U's. But instead, in TypeScript, we actually need to include this money symbol right before our first curly bracket to actually get this string to work. So if you guys have been following the series for a while, you probably already know that that $sign doesn't matter, and you probably didn't even think it was for that specific reason anyway. But anyway, getting back into the actual game itself, there's not much more for us to really test, considering it's going to always say you already own this item. Now, I know we didn't actually implement any Game Passes during this episode. Don't worry, we will do that in the next episode because we do have a ton of Game Passes to implement. Now, with all that being said, that's going to be it for this episode. As always, if you guys did enjoy, smash the like button, hit the subscribe button, and if you want to support me or gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I made during this episode, check out the Patreon. There's a link down below in the description. Anyways, with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next episode.